Hello YouTubers and welcome back to Go Figure Customs YouTube channel. It's time once again for another 2-minute tutorial. If you're like me, you've had problems getting realistic flesh tones. This is a trick that I've stumbled upon recently that I really like, and I've started using it pretty much on all of my customs. For the best effect for this, you're gonna need an airbrush. But you can do it without an airbrush. This is still possible to do without an airbrush, but for the best effect, you do kind of want an airbrush for this. First off, you start with Citadel Pink Horror, and you do a full base coat of this. You don't have to dry brush this or airbrush this on. You can just do a coat of this with a regular brush. Let that dry, and then airbrush on your favorite skin tone. For that, I have found the best results are Army Paints War Paint Barbarian Flesh. Seems to give me my best results that I like. And I do airbrush this on. However, if you do not have an airbrush, this is a trick I learned from one of our guests on General Geekery, Jim Godfrey. Use a wet palette, and I'm going to show you what a wet palette is. To make a wet palette, you need a sponge and some parchment paper. If you're married, you have parchment paper. Trust me, it's in the kitchen. So I took a lid to some Tupperware, put a sponge, piece of parchment paper on top of that. You let that kind of soak in there. Put a little bit of flesh paint on there. The water kind of seeps through the parchment paper a little bit and prevents it from drying out, and it thins it down a little bit. Because what you want to do, if you don't have an airbrush, you need to do this in thin but even coats. And a wet palette will help you do that. So this is actually a kind of a 2-for-1. It's how to make your own wet palette and how to get better flesh tones. And I've started using wet palette on pretty much all of the painting that I do, and I found it works really well with Tamiya paints. Tamiya paints historically have been very difficult to use, especially for new customizers. I found they work beautifully through an airbrush. A lot of times they don't need to be thinned. You just need a little bit of airbrush accelerator. So there's another tip and trick for you. They work really well through an airbrush. I can't do a lot of the fancy techniques with an airbrush, but I save hours with an airbrush. But the wet palette will, I've started using the wet palette to do pretty much all of my painting. It thins it down so you don't have that melted crayon look on your customs, which I absolutely abhor when my customs look like they're just caked in paint. Drives me crazy that some of my customs look horrible because the paint's too thick. So that's a good way to thin them out, is using a wet palette. And then that technique works really well for flesh tones. So once again, that is airbrush or paint on some Pink Horror from Citadel Paints, and then airbrush or light coat on Barbarian Flesh from Army War Paints. And you will get very nice, realistic skin tones. This one, I showed this in another 2-minute tip and tutorial a little bit ago about weathering. This is one of those examples of that flesh tone. I painted on that. The head is on there really well. I couldn't pop the head back off to airbrush it. So I did the wet palette on this, and it does work. So there you go. As always, thank you for watching, and please do all that fun social media stuff like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Thanks for watching.